Rikers Island, where gangs rule and justice fails. This is a true crime documentary. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The island beneath the city. Just 8 miles from Manhattan's glittering skyline, across a narrow causeway off Queens, lies a world that most New Yorkers pretend doesn't exist. A stretch of reclaimed land surrounded by dark, oily waters, its name whispered in fear, Rikers Island. For nearly a century, Rikers has been the beating heart of New York City's jail system. Officially, it was meant to be a temporary holding facility, a place where detainees awaited trial or transfer. But over time, it became something else entirely. According to the New York Times and Department of Correction archives, Rikers grew into one of the largest correctional complexes in the world, housing over 10,000 inmates at its peak, spread across 10 separate jails. And within those walls, the law of the street never died, it evolved. By the early 2000s, Rikers had become a territory where gangs ruled the tiers, and justice, if it existed at all, belonged to the strong. The Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings, and Trinitarios didn't just survive inside. They built empires from behind bars, enforcing order, punishment, and loyalty in ways the administration could not or would not control. According to federal court filings from the landmark case Nunez v. City of New York, 2011 to 2015, Rikers was officially recognized as a facility plagued by a pervasive culture of violence. Officers and inmates alike described an environment where physical assaults were routine, and investigations into staff misconduct almost never led to punishment. In interviews compiled by the Marshall Project and the city, former inmates described the same haunting pattern. You don't call it jail. You call it survival. Inside Rikers, every corner has a code. Every gaze means something. New arrivals, known as fresh fish, are tested within hours. If you're alone, you're prey. If you're weak, you're marked. If you're loud, you're silenced. The cells are narrow, built of gray cinder block, damp with humidity and sweat. The air carries the echo of metal doors slamming, hundreds of times a day, and the low, rhythmic hum of tension that never fades. Correctional officers, outnumbered and underpaid, often rely on inmate enforcers to maintain order. According to Human Rights Watch reports from 2014, some officers would intentionally empower gang leaders, giving them influence over cell assignments and privileges in exchange for keeping violence contained. It was a system that worked, until it didn't. In the winter of 2012, a young inmate we'll call Darius D. Monroe arrived at Rikers after being arrested for armed robbery in Brooklyn. He was 19. Thin, quiet, and wearing the kind of nervous half-smile that vanishes quickly in a place like this, he was processed through intake, fingerprinted, photographed, and stripped. "Ever been here before?" an officer asked. Darius shook his head. "Then keep your head down," the officer muttered, "and pray you get a quiet dorm." But Rikers didn't do quiet. D was placed in a dormitory in the Robert N. Davern Complex, RNDC, the same building once cited by federal monitors as the most violent juvenile facility in the country. It was dominated by the Bloods, particularly a set known as Mac Baller Brims. The gang had more influence in the unit than the correctional officers themselves. According to court testimonies from former COs, certain house gang members, inmates appointed by guards to clean, distribute food, or control the phones, acted as de facto enforcers. They decided who could eat, who could sleep, and who got punished. When D tried to make a call his first night, a heavily tattooed inmate stopped him. "That phone's taxed," he said. D didn't understand. "Taxed means it's ours. You pay or you don't call." He never used the phone again. Over the next few weeks, D watched the pattern repeat. Every day, fights broke out, sometimes over respect, sometimes over nothing at all. The guards would rush in late, swinging batons, shouting commands that no one followed. According to a 2015 New York City Department of Investigation report, the use of force by correctional staff at Rikers doubled within 5 years, not because inmates grew more violent, but because the system itself was breaking down. The gangs filled that vacuum. Bloods patrolled the dorms, Crips controlled contraband routes, and Latin gangs held sway in the kitchens and transport unit. Cash was useless here. Everything ran on barter: food, soap, and favors. And over all of it hung a rule that every inmate learned quickly: no snitching, no weakness, no noise. One night, D witnessed something he would never forget. 2 inmates, one Blood, one Crip, had been arguing for days over control of a bunk area. The tension snapped just before lights out. One swung a padlock inside a sock. The other pulled a sharpened piece of metal from under his mattress. By the time officers arrived, the floor was slick with blood. Both men were carried out on stretchers. The next morning, nothing was said. The dorm resumed as if it hadn't happened. Breakfast trays were served. The same jokes echoed. The same gang leader walked the same path, unchallenged. Later, D heard an older inmate whisper, "You get used to it. Violence is like the weather here. It just changes direction." According to Federal Monitor reports from 2017, the correctional leadership often failed to record incidents accurately. Many assaults were labeled minor, even when inmates required hospitalization. Some officers falsified paperwork to protect themselves or their informants, known as jailhouse managers. Those same reports described Rikers as a place where fear governs the population more effectively than any policy. That fear wasn't just between inmates. Officers lived it too. The Correction Officers Benevolent Association publicly stated that staff assaults had reached crisis levels, but behind closed doors, many COs admitted that retaliation for speaking out was common. By 2015, Rikers had drawn national attention. The suicide of Kalief Browder, a teenager held for 3 years without trial, exposed to solitary confinement and beatings, sent shockwaves through the country. His story, widely covered by The New Yorker and later Netflix, became a symbol of everything broken inside the jail, a system where justice delayed was justice destroyed. Lawyers, activists, and city officials called for reform. But inside the island, little changed. According to DOJ oversight summaries, new training programs and security protocols were introduced, yet assaults continued, often rising after each attempt at reform. Because Rikers wasn't broken, it was designed this way. A retired warden, quoted in a 2018 New York One News interview, said it plainly. Rikers isn't just a jail. It's a pressure cooker. You turn up the heat, but there's no valve. Eventually, it explodes. And that explosion was already building, in the form of a secret war between factions so deep-rooted that even the officers couldn't predict where it would strike next. As the bloodlines drew tighter and the corruption deeper, Rikers was no longer about law or punishment. It was about power, who had it, who wanted it, and who would die trying to keep it. The Lords of Rikers. Morning comes slowly on Rikers Island. The fluorescent lights never really turn off, they just dim enough to remind you that time is still moving somewhere beyond the walls. Inside the George R. Vierno Center, GRVC, one of Rikers' most violent facilities, the hum of waking inmates sounds like an engine revving up for war. By 2014, Rikers was no longer a correctional complex. It was an ecosystem, and the gangs were its government. According to the New York City Board of Corrections' 2014 annual report, more than a third of all detainees were affiliated with major street gangs. The Bloods, the Crips, the Trinitarios, and the Latin Kings dominated not only the dorms but the entire flow of goods and information through the island. Food, phones, cigarettes, pills, everything had a chain of command. Officers could confiscate items in the morning and see the same contraband back in circulation by nightfall. Nothing stayed hidden for long, because at Rikers information was currency, and everyone was buying. A composite figure, Lieutenant Raymond Hall, a veteran correctional officer with 20 years on the job, once described Rikers as a city inside a city. According to court testimony in Nunez v. City of New York, 2015, Hall admitted under oath that the department had unofficial understandings with certain inmates to keep order. These inmates were known as the Lords, high-ranking gang members who enforced discipline within their dorms and negotiated with officers to avoid riot. Hall didn't deny it. "You can't control a block with 12 officers and 100 gangbangers," he said. "So you find a few who'll keep the peace for a price." That price was usually freedom. Freedom to move through halls without handcuffs, freedom to use the phones, or to distribute commissary goods unchecked. But power, once given, doesn't stay contained. Within months, the Lords began running the jail like it was their own kingdom. Ghost, a pseudonym for a former inmate interviewed by the Marshall Project, described it simply: "The COs run paperwork. The gangs run everything else." In the GRVC, that power was visible in every corner. The Bloods occupied the upper tier, their leader, a broad-shouldered man known as Stacks, controlling who slept where. The Crips claimed the lower tier, commanded by Boog, an older inmate who had done time in Sing Sing and knew the politics of prison hierarchy better than most politicians knew their own parties. Tension was constant but calculated. Neither side wanted chaos that drew too much attention. Instead, they competed in silence, using manipulation, extortion, and psychological warfare. New inmates were treated like chess pieces. Stacks would approach them on day one, smiling with gold-capped teeth. "You from uptown? Bronx?" If the answer was yes, the offer followed: "We got you. Just follow the code." That code meant allegiance. It meant loyalty and it meant silence. But something was shifting beneath that uneasy balance. A black market economy was growing fast, fueled by contraband cell phones and synthetic drugs smuggled through officers and civilian workers. According to a 2017 Department of Investigation report, more than 70 correctional staff members were arrested in a single year for trafficking contraband into Rikers. Phones became the new weapons, tools for coordination, blackmail, and surveillance. Videos of assaults began leaking onto the internet, often uploaded by inmates themselves to prove dominance. The administration tried cracking down, but the cracks were already too deep. For the gangs, the phones turned Rikers into a headquarters, not just a cell block. They conducted street operations from inside, ordering hits, managing drug drops, and directing younger members on the outside. A 2016 NYPD intelligence briefing confirmed that gang activity in several boroughs had direct connections to inmate communication networks originating from Rikers Island. The Lords weren't just surviving anymore, they were expanding. Among those caught in the middle was Darius D. Monroe, the young inmate introduced earlier. By now, he'd learned to navigate Rikers' unspoken hierarchy. He kept his head down, traded favors carefully, and never spoke to officers. But survival had a cost. To stay safe, D had joined a smaller blood set under Stack's command. His tasks were simple: clean the tier, deliver messages, and keep an eye on the new arrivals. In return, he got protection and 2 hot meals a day that weren't stolen from his tray. One evening, while delivering food to the upper tier, he overheard an argument between 2 lords. The words were low, but the meaning was clear. There was a plan, a major shipment of cell phones and pills coming in through a correctional worker. According to federal indictments filed in 2018, similar operations actually occurred. Officers were bribed to smuggle items into the jails, sometimes earning thousands of dollars per delivery. D realized that the gangs weren't just running Rikers, They were running the people paid to control them. Violence, when it came, was never random. Every act had motive. Every assault had meaning. On a sweltering August afternoon, a CO discovered a shank in a Crip-controlled cell. The search was supposed to stay quiet, but within hours, everyone knew who'd been snitched on. That night, the dorm erupted. Metal trays, fists, and blades turned the air thick with blood and shouting. By dawn, 5 inmates were hospitalized. 1 correctional officer had been stabbed in the leg. The next day, administration blamed gang retaliation. But according to internal DOC records later released through FOIA requests, the real cause was an informant planted by the intelligence unit, an attempt to break the gang structure. It backfired. Because on Rikers Island, no one controlled the outcome of violence. Within days, the entire GRVC went on lockdown. Inmates were confined to their cells 23 hours a day. Officers patrolled with riot shields. The air reeked of pepper spray and disinfectant. In interviews given years later to the City and New York Magazine, multiple officers confirmed that lockdowns rarely work. They only intensified hatred, forcing enemies into close proximity, separated by nothing but steel bars and anger. It was during one of these lockdowns that D met Sergeant Alvarez, a mid-level officer with tired eyes and a habit of smoking in empty corridors. Alvarez wasn't cruel, he was resigned. He told D, "They don't want this place fixed. You understand? Rikers makes money off chaos. The city pays overtime every time someone gets hurt." D didn't respond. But the thought stuck. According to New York City budget audits, the Department of Corrections overtime costs exceeded $200 million annually during that period, much of it tied directly to staff shortages and inmate violence. The island was feeding itself. Weeks later, after restrictions eased, Stacks called a meeting in the dayroom. Bloods filled the benches, eyes alert. "We run this island," he said. "They can't stop us. But we gotta keep it clean. No more random cuts. No heat from the outside." But the truce didn't last. Boog, the Crip shot caller, had made his own deal. His crew controlled the laundry detail, which meant control over inmate uniforms, which meant access to any contraband hidden in the clothes. When a shipment disappeared, Stacks blamed him. According to incident records verified by city investigators, the ensuing fight became one of the worst outbreaks of violence at Rikers in a decade. 27 inmates injured. 3 hospitalized with stab wounds. The administration issued a statement calling it an isolated disturbance. But everyone inside knew the truth. It was war. Afterward, a quiet sense of dread spread through the blocks. D, sitting on his bunk that night, listened to the sirens wailing somewhere outside, the helicopter lights sweeping across the walls. He whispered to himself, "They say this place holds you till court. But Rikers don't hold you, it owns you." For the officers, it was another day. For the gangs, another victory. Because on Rikers Island, justice didn't fail by accident, it failed by design. And in the chaos that followed, the line between prisoner and warden was about to disappear completely. The fall of Rikers. Dawn on Rikers Island doesn't bring peace. It brings the sound of metal gates slamming, the echo of chains, and the slow creak of a system collapsing under its own weight. By the mid-2010s, Rikers had become a national scandal. The New York Times called it a symbol of everything broken in America's justice system. Federal monitors described it as a culture of violence so entrenched that reform efforts are repeatedly undermined by indifference. Even the city's own mayor admitted in 2017 that the jail was beyond repair. But before Rikers could close, it had to fall apart, one truth at a time. Inside the Anna M. Cross Center, a vast complex housing over 2,000 detainees, a new kind of war was brewing. It wasn't between the Bloods and Crips anymore. It was between the truth and the lie, between those who believed Rikers could be changed and those who knew it never would. Darius D. Monroe, the young inmate who had once entered Rikers as a scared teenager, now moved through its corridors like a ghost. He'd been transferred 3 times, survived 2 riots, and watched more men leave in body bags than buses. He had seen justice twist into currency. Guards who smuggled contraband one day were giving safety lectures the next. Gang leaders who preached peace in daylight ordered hits after dark. The system had swallowed everyone, officers, inmates, even reformers, and spat out something unrecognizable. According to federal court filings and Department of Investigation reports, by 2018, assaults on staff and inmates had reached historic highs despite record-breaking budgets for safety reform. Cameras had been installed, training programs expanded, yet the violence kept climbing. Because no camera could film what really ran Rikers: silence, fear, and profit. One winter evening, as snow drifted against the fences, Dee overheard 2 officers talking outside his dorm. Their words cut through the cold like blades. "They're gonna shut this place down," one said. "Not before I retire," the other laughed. "Let the next guy clean this mess." Dee didn't believe it. Rikers had survived every scandal, lawsuits, federal investigations, even riot. It was too big, too infamous, too useful to the system that fed on it. But this time, something had changed outside the walls. Public outrage had grown impossible to ignore. The New Yorker's exposé on Kalief Browder, a teenager who spent 3 years at Rikers without trial, had shaken the conscience of a nation. Human rights organizations were demanding answers. Celebrities, politicians, and even former wardens were calling for closure. According to New York City Council hearings in 2017, the cost of housing one inmate on Rikers had soared past $200,000 per year, more than tuition at an Ivy League university. Each beating, each lawsuit, each death added another layer of financial rot to a system already morally bankrupt. For the first time, the island's collapse wasn't just inevitable, it was political. In the chaos, a new rumor spread through the cellblocks. The department planned to transfer high-risk inmates to upstate facilities. To the men of Rikers, that meant one thing: divide and silence. According to federal oversight testimony, mass transfers were often used to scatter inmates who had become too vocal, too organized, or too aware of how the system worked. Dee was one of them. He'd begun quietly cooperating with legal aid groups, passing information through coded letters. Details about excessive force, falsified records, and corruption. He knew the risk. Anyone labeled a snitch on Rikers had no protection, not even from the officers. One night, a correctional captain confronted him. "You think the people out there care?" the man sneered. "They'll shut this place down and build another. You'll still be behind bars somewhere else." Dee stared at him. "Maybe. But maybe someone will finally see what this place does." The captain didn't reply. He just walked away, leaving the sound of keys jangling like a verdict. By 2019, Rikers was no longer just a local story, it was a national warning. Congressional committees, investigative journalists, and civil rights lawyers were dissecting its every secret. A Department of Justice review found systemic corruption, officer complicity in gang operations, and widespread violations of constitutional rights. Internal documents revealed that officers were falsifying incident reports to hide assaults, sometimes marking near-fatal injuries as minor altercations. Even more damning were the numbers. Between 2010 and 2020, at least 100 detainees died on Rikers Island, many under suspicious or preventable circumstances, overdoses, suicides, or neglect. Each death came with the same official statement: the department is conducting a full investigation. But the investigations almost never led to convictions. As one former warden told the city in 2021, "Rikers doesn't kill you fast. It kills you slow, one rule, one beating, one night at a time. Inside the crumbling complex, Dee's reality grew more fragile. Lockdowns became longer. Food rations smaller. Mental health units overflowed. He saw men carving messages into the walls with plastic spoons, names, dates, please. Some read, "Still waiting for trial." Others, "Tell my family I tried." According to Human Rights Watch and NYCLU reports, nearly 80% of Rikers inmates were pretrial detainees. Legally innocent, waiting months or years for their cases to move. For many, Rikers was the punishment, not the waiting room. Dee's cellmate, a soft-spoken father of two awaiting trial for a non-violent offense, once said, "They don't care if you're guilty or not. You're on Rikers. That's your sentence." In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and Rikers became a death trap. Reports from the New York Post and The Intercept confirmed that infection rates inside were several times higher than anywhere else in the city. Social distancing was impossible. Medical treatment was delayed. Dozens of detainees and staff died. It was the breaking point. Advocates renewed their demand to close Rikers Island for good. And finally, after decades of cover-ups and failed reforms, the city relented. The official plan, announced publicly in 2020, promised to shut down Rikers by the end of the decade, replacing it with smaller borough-based facilities. But even as the announcement made headlines, violence continued. Within that same year, at least 18 more detainees died, according to Department of Correction report. Because closing Rikers wasn't as simple as locking a gate. It meant dismantling an entire culture, one built on corruption, silence, and survival. Dee was released in the fall of 2021. He stepped off the bus at Queens Plaza, the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. He looked back toward the island, invisible in the distance but still there, pulsing beneath the skyline like a hidden wound. Freedom didn't feel like victory. It felt like survivor's guilt. He'd left behind men who'd never make it out. Some innocent, some guilty, all forgotten. He found work through a re-entry program and began speaking with advocacy groups about his experiences. When reporters asked him what Rikers really was, he said, "It's not a jail. It's a machine that eats people. Once you go in, you don't come out the same. Some don't come out at all." According to New York City Comptroller audits, as of 2024, the city still spends more than $500,000 a year per inmate at Rikers Island. The facility remains open, partially operating, its official closure delayed by political disputes and budget battles. For many who lived and worked there, the promise of closure feels like another illusion, another way to make the island disappear without ever confronting what it became. The ghosts of Rikers don't haunt the cells. They haunt the system that built it, the courts, the politicians, the silence. They whisper through headlines, through hearings, through every new scandal that begins with the same old phrase, "According to reports," and as long as justice fails inside America's jails, Rikers Island will live on, not as a place but as a warning.